Hello, everyone, and welcome to Get Can Lit, a podcast that showcases Canadian authors. I'm your host, Maria Zupardi, an avid Can Lit reader, and keep on listening to find your next favorite book today. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the third episode of Get Can Lit, the podcast. I'm very excited to be going through a ton of book recommendations for you, as well as a little look at what's on my TBR coming up, a reading update, shouting out some new releases, and of course, picking a new book for my TBR jar. So let's get right into it. So, as we know, February is starting tomorrow, and of course, everybody's going to be reading a lot of Black authors. So, I figured why not give you a bunch of Black Canadian authors to read and include in your month long readathon, but also give you way more recommendations than you can read in a month. So, you can still read Black voices beyond February because, that's the goal here. Let's just not read certain authors for 1 month of the year and then just not for the rest of the year. We don't do that here. And I hope you don't either. And that's with like any marginalized community. So yeah, so let's get adding those Canadian authors to your TBR list. So I've split these up in genres. Some genres are more extensive than others, but you know what? It's fine. I've read most of these books except for one. So I'll start with the tragic genre first, and that is romance. To be honest, I didn't do too much research before this podcast episode because I do plan on doing something more romantic, I guess, obviously closer to Valentine's Day. But like off the top of my head, and an author that I've read, so that's the author of Ties That Tether, The Sweetest Remedy, and one more book that I really can't remember the title of because I haven't read that one yet, but, like, I've read Jane's first 2, and they were really great. They're very different from each other, so if you want something more spicy, then definitely read Ties That Tether. If you want something that's more rom-commy, light and fluffy, then read The Sweetest Remedy. If you do know of Black Canadian romance authors, please let me know because I'd love to read more Black Canadian voices in the romance genre. I just have not been able to find any. So, yeah, romance is just Jane and Caro, and I know her first book was on Book of the Month at some point when it first came out. So, yeah, it was probably you probably saw that a lot. And then you maybe saw The Sweetest Remedy around, but not too much. The 3rd book, I didn't even know it was published, like, I found it at Queen Books randomly on the shelf, so I'm like, "Oh, I know this author, I didn't know she had a 3rd book," so, I don't know, I'm rooting for you, Jane. Moving on to poetry. Finish the Sentence by Leslie Roach. This came out right after the uprising of George Floyd. It's about the author's personal experience, facing her own experiences, dealing with racism, stereotypes, all of that really sad stuff, especially in a place like Canada when people think that we're very welcome and opening. And that's not the case all the time. I think if you really want to learn about what it's like to be a marginalized person in anywhere in the world, then definitely read Finish the Sentence by Leslie Roach. A couple of the poems really stood out to me. I don't remember the names because I read this when it first came out. So, but yeah, I just remember like really being like, oh my God, like this is this is just like it really honestly, a few of them made me cry. I'll admit it. I didn't want to admit it, but I will admit that I cried with this poetry collection. And then the other one that I haven't read, but I think it's a very interesting cover is Burning Sugar by Cicely Bell Blaine. Again, it's another book that is very much about Black identity, history, and, like a lived experience, obviously influenced by the constant search for liberation. Yes, I just read that, but I also haven't read this book. So please forgive me. This does sound like it would be a very interesting, like a book that would take, even though it's poetry, it would take different forms that aren't a conventional poem because at the bottom of this description, it says, "In Burning Sugar, verse and epistolary, racism and resilience, pain and precarity are flawlessly sewn together by the mighty hands of a Black queer femme." So I feel like epistolary, like that's letters, verse, like I feel like this would be a very interesting poetry collection to read. So that's why I'm recommending you add Burning Sugar by Cicely Bell Blaine to your Black Canadian Voices TBR. And if you look at the book, I've seen it in bookstores many times. I kick myself every day for not having bought it when I saw it. Like it's a very interesting trim size. Like it's a lot wider or longer than like a regular sized book. So it's very interesting. It would look really great on your bookshelves. But yeah, I definitely plan on reading this at some point in the future because I've been thinking about it since it was published and I still haven't read it. So shame on me. And another book that I read it, but I feel bad recommending a book that like I read, but I don't remember too much of. But here we are. The last poetry book for you is Where the Baedeker Leads by James Yaku. I remember loving it. I cannot tell you anything about this poetry book, but like again, it was just very short poetry, but it also kind of dealt with technology and again the same themes of racism, stereotypes, things like that. So I think it has something very important to add to the conversation. All right, those were the 3 poetry books I recommend. Even if you don't read a lot of poetry like I do, I really don't read too much. I love Canadian poetry because I just feel like I get it, you know? It speaks to me. I don't know if it's because of the way it's written sometimes or because of the form and I don't know, but it's just I vibe with it. Like I love it. I've read other poetry collections that like aren't by Canadians and I'm like, meh, whatever, but I don't know. Canadian poetry is on its own level, so I'm really happy and proud of them. Moving on to a short story collection because I don't think this is too well known outside of Ontario, so that's why I want to shout it out. That is Shut Up You're Pretty by Tia Mutanji, if this story collection is interconnected or not. But like again, I think it was the first book published under the VS imprint at Arsenal Pulp Press, which is which that is edited and like kind of curated by Vivek Shreya. I think if Vivek Shreya publishes your book, then you are like the next Canlit superstar. And I think Burning Sugar is also under that imprint as well, if I'm not mistaken. I'm just gonna search it up because yes, see, I was right. It was under the VS books. I remember this book being marketed as a one that explores kind of like womanness, and identity, and maybe femininity, if I'm not mistaken. You would think that I would be able to tell you about these books, but all I remember is that I loved them in the moment. And shouldn't that count for book recommendations? I think if you've read, honestly, I did read Shut Up You're Pretty and then Frying Plantain by Zalika Reed Benta back to back. So in my mind, like, I confuse them a lot when I talk about them to people, but I know Frying Plantain by Zalika Reed Benta is interconnected stories, so that's why I'm like, is Shut Up You're Pretty also interconnected or is it not? Because like, again, read them back to back. I should stop doing that, reading similar books back to back, because when I get to the fiction part of this book recommendations list, you will see why I have also screwed myself by doing this. I know short story collections aren't for everyone, but I think if you're looking to try a short story collection, like that's why I'm like, maybe you should try Shut Up You're Pretty. Check out, maybe don't read the description because sometimes it's just too literary to understand, which I totally get. I'm like that all the time. Go through some reviews, maybe ask someone if you know who's read it, and then see if you'd be up for it. Or don't buy the book and just borrow it from the library. And then if you like it, buy it after. Like that's also another option for you. Cause I know, again, like I get it. Short stories, not for everyone, but I think Shut Up You're Pretty can be for most people, if not everybody. Okay, moving on to YA. I have 3 for you because, again, I loved them very, very much. The first one is This Book Betrays My Brother by Kagiso Lasego Malope. I loved this book. It takes place in South Africa, which I want to kind of circle back to later on in this podcast episode. I know it's about a girl who witnesses her older brother committing a violent act. And now, like, you know, for most of the novel, she's like, do I tell people? Do I not? That she grew up in. Like, you very much the man, hold the male child of the in the family, like, to high regards. Like, it was very much, like, family values, and it didn't read too young, even though it's YA. Like, yeah, maybe sometimes because the main character is, like, 14, like, you know, it was just slightly young at times, but, like, the subject matter makes it for a bit of an older audience, I think, which there's nothing wrong with that. Like, it's also a short book, so you can, like, rip through it in 2 days maybe. So, yeah, highly recommend This Book Betrays My Brother by Kagiso Lasego Malope. The second YA book for you is Hurricane Summer by Asha Bromfield. Now, again, another book that also deals with a very mature subject matter, but I think this book reads for the older YA versus this book Betrays My Brother. And it also takes place in mostly in Jamaica. So this book really stood out to me because it was such a beautiful cover and I wasn't expecting the darkness inside. So just be warned. It's about two sisters who travel back home to Jamaica, like to be with their father, who's been separated from the family for quite some time. And while they're there, they're learning, they're clearly not used to customs of Jamaica. So, like, they're kind of in a whole new environment that's very bizarre to them because they're just used to life in Canada. But it also kind of deals with colorism, classism, father-daughter relationships. So it's very well written and very intricate. And I think if you're looking for something that you can like really sit down and kind of dive into, Hurricane Summer by Asha Bromfield is a fantastic book for you. So, the last book recommendation I have for you in YA, which I didn't know was YA until well into award season when it was up for a library award here in Ontario. That is Gutter Child by J.L. Richardson. If you're looking for something more academic or dark academia with science fiction dystopian type vibes, this is definitely the book for you. I think it was such a standout. It's about obviously a private school, and this girl is chosen to be separated from her peers, and she's supposed to kind of like tattle on them in a way or like keep them in check. And it was just very much like it looks into like colorism, those types of like injustices within the community. So like it was just very much about privilege, about who are privileged and who aren't privileged. So I thought, again, it's has a lot to say. Definitely the type of book that you want to read once to just like read the story and then read a second time to really absorb the deeper meaning of it. I think that definitely warrants two reads because there's just so much going on in there. But Gutter Child by J.L. Richardson is definitely the more quote unquote like adulty of these YA picks that I have for you. Moving on to literary fiction, which that is the last in my long list of book recommendations for you because, even though there are many, many more books to read, these are just, I'm just basically choosing from my shelves of what I've read and recommending them to you. So for literary fiction, I'll start with the books I know very, very well, and then it'll just go down from there. So we have I Don't Know Why People Think This Book Was a Thriller. I didn't When I read the back cover description, I didn't take it as a thriller, like, I took it as more something more contemporary with literary fiction kind of mixed into it. So, basically, it's about 2 women who are connected in ways that they do not know until much later in the book, like, basically the ending, and so they've been kidnapped together, and they're stuck in this room and telling each other their life stories. And then slowly, as they're saying what's happened to them, like we know that there's a obvious difference between them. So one was poor, one was from a privileged background, and it was just the way that it tied together in the end was just like made you cry. I did cry in this one, full disclosure. But I think it was written really well. The ending leaves a lot to discuss as well, which is really great. It's not the type of literary fiction that like, it's very much accessible to everybody, like, you can read it and love it. You can read it and discuss it, like, it's just not limiting in that way. So that's why I think it's a really great book to read. And on the opposite side of that, we have The Youth of God by Hassan Getty Centaur. That book is about a boy, and then it flips between the point of views of this teenage boy, and his teacher who is trying to make him better and trying to push him like, to the path of going to university and getting an education and becoming a doctor basically because that's what the boy is interested in. But then the boy has a lot of trouble at home. This takes place in Scarborough, I believe. I'm pretty sure it was Scarborough Lit. So anyways, the boy has trouble at home and he turns to his local mosque, for guidance, like for as a place of comfort, which is fantastic. But unfortunately, at this mosque, there's an imam who has a different agenda, let's say, and he's radicalizing these young boys and like encouraging them to basically run off to Somalia. I believe it was Somalia in the book. So again, like this book is such an eye opener. It's even though like it takes the point of view of like an adult male and a teenager. I think it doesn't read too young at all. I mean, some parts might because again, like it's just a teenage boy point of view, but like other than that, like it's a really beautifully written novel. And I think it has a lot to say about education and the opportunities that are given to racialized boys in schools because obviously like they don't have the same resources or the same access to resources as other children do. So yeah, it has so much to say. The ending, oh my gosh, just buddy read this book. You will need a buddy read for this book because it's just that type of ending where it's like, what just happened? I need to talk to somebody about this right away. So you've been warned, basically, for this book, For the Youth of God by Hassan Getty Centaur. Now, if you've already read Brother by David Sheriandi, then you will love The Youth of God. However, if you're like me and read these two books back to back, you will remember one more than the other because they're kind of similar in the story. So that's kind of what happened here. This is where the podcast goes downhill. And I tell you, I read Brother and then I read The Youth of God, but I remember The Youth of God a lot more than Brother. So I do recommend it. I just don't remember, like, I rated it 5 stars on Goodreads. I just don't remember too much about it. So maybe I should reread Brother so I can get a sense of what it is again. Much like I should reread Reproduction by Ian Williams because I remember not liking it when I first read it. But I feel like if I read this book now, I would totally love it. And it's kind of, I know it was like an intricate story of like family and sickness and all of that in Reproduction by Ian Williams, but I can't remember it. But I will recommend it to you because that's just what I do best. And there you have it. There's like 15 books, I think. I'm pretty sure 15 if my math is correct. It's probably not, but there are more than 10 books for you to read in 1 month of February, which haha, you will never do. So you're welcome. I just gave you a good TBR for the rest of the year of Black Canadian voices. I hope you get to read most of those and love them and talk to me about them because they're really great books, all of them. Like I truly loved them. I think you'll love them too. Minus Burning Sugar, of course. I didn't read it, but I know when I read it, I will love it. So that's why I do not hesitate to recommend it. So, yeah, I hope that there was something for everyone in that long list of book recommendations. If you have any more, I would love to hear them. I will post up an Instagram photo at some point this week and, just like as a place for us all to kind of comment about our favorite Black Canadian authors. So, keep an moving on from book recommendations to Black Canadian voices I do want to read in February, or I plan to read in February, but also if I don't reach them, then you know what? They're moving into, I will officially put them into my Canlit TBR jar. But I haven't put them in yet because I'm like, I'm going to try to read them. So one is oh my gosh, this book, I'm not going to be able to pronounce this properly, but the Dis the Disgraphist, I believe I probably said that wrong. That is Canicia Lubrin's poetry collection. I've been meaning to read Canicia Lubrin forever. I call her a Canlit superstar because to me she is. Debut book comes out later this year. I don't remember when. I wanna say, like, May maybe? Like, May or June. I know it's summer, like, early summer kind of release date, so that's why I'm very excited for that book, and I really just wanna read her poetry before that comes out. So that's why I would love to read it now, between now and May. I don't have a physical copy with me, so I can just easily borrow that from Libby or something, the library app. So yeah, that's what I plan to read. And again, like poetry, easy to get through. Can read it in like a day or two, depending on like the words, depending if they're hard words. I don't know. But yeah, that's one book I plan to read this month. The other one is Abolitionist Intimacies by E.L. Jones. Now, it's nonfiction. I don't think I'll get to it, or if I do get to it, I think I'm gonna probably end up having to switch to the ebook halfway through because, like, me and nonfiction and physical nonfiction books, we do not mix well together. But I still bought my copy because it's such a beautiful cover. It's a nice green with the pretty flowers on it, and they've got bees on it. I love bees on book covers. So E.L. Jones is, I'll just read her bio. She is a poet, journalist, professor, and activist living in Halifax. She was Halifax's poet laureate from 2013 to 2015. Um, and her work focuses on social justice issues such as feminism, prison abolition, anti racism, and decolonization. So, Abolitionist Intimacies, it's basically about the history of prisons in Canada and their relationship to settler colonialism and anti Black racism. Very important to the discussions that are being had in Canada right now with, like, budgets and putting more taxpayers' dollars with police budgets and what have you, all of that BS. So, I think it's definitely a very timely book because I think it's also a really timely book that has something very important to say. So, my hope is that I get to read some nonfiction because I don't get to read it too much. But again, like, I'm terrified that I'm just gonna not be able to read. And if that happens, I will definitely borrow Abolitionist Intimacies by E.L. Jones from the library and get it read that way because, again, like, kind of like Policing Black Lives, I believe that was Robin Maynard. We have that book, and then The Skin We're In by Desmond Cole, like, both very important books that have something really great to say. I think this will be in that same boat, so that's why I really hope to read it. And another book that I really want to read this month or some point in the very, very near future is Butter, Honey, Pig Bread by Francesca Kuyasi. I won't tell you why I want to read it because it's part of a secret TBR, and that's all you're getting from me for now. So those three books are on my February Black Canadian Lit TBR list. I'm sure many, many people have read Butter, Honey, Pig Bread. I'll be very surprised if you've read the Canicia Lubrin poetry book because I know lots of people don't read poetry. And Abolitionist Intimacies, I'll also be very surprised if you've read it because owned Canadian publishers. Like, those books just don't tend to be on everybody's reading list, which is fine, but, like, that's why I'm here to read them and put them on your book list. All right, so moving on to some new releases now. There have been so many, but it's hard to keep track of them, but I do have a very, very long list in my notes app on my phone, which is kind of a mess right now. So first off, we have What Remains of Elsie Jane by Chelsea Wakelin. Such a beautiful book about grief, and I know people call it like it's like a book for weirdos or some like they compare it to something and then they say for weirdos, but I don't know. To me, it's not like a very weird book. Like, sure, the main character Elsie Jane has questionable decisions, make not the best decisions. And I think Elsie Jane, she's just a charming character, and I really loved this book. So that's a debut fiction author for you. If you're definitely looking for something that's more contemporary, definitely pick that up. The next book on my release radar is Hold My Girl by Charlene Carr. I literally just got my copy yesterday. I was at the mall. I'm like, oh my God, let me go look at this, see if this book is here really quickly. And it was, and I picked it up. I was so happy. So, one thing about this book is that I think it was compared or she got an endorsement from Jodi Picoult, which makes me question about like, I feel like this book is for Jodi Picoult fans, but I think I'm just so over Jodi now that I'm like, I don't wanna compare Charlene Carr to Jodi because, like, Charlene is a new voice in Canadian literature, like, let's just separate her from the American person. So, Hold My Girl is a story of two women whose eggs are switched during IVF, and so it's basically that type of Jodi Picoult book about motherhood and, would you give your kid up or the kid that you've raised up because they're not your flesh and blood, So I think it's a very important and intriguing discussion that could be had from this book. I'm excited to pick this up very soon, hopefully. We'll see how my February goes. I like to say February is for short books because it's just a shorter month. So you should absolutely be reading shorter books. So I don't know if I'll get to this in February, but my hope is that I will. And coming out in on February 14th, so a couple weeks from now, but I'm sure if you pre-order, my hope is that the book gets delivered before pub date. And that is Venko by Sherry DeMaline. I have not read a Sherry DeMaline book, believe it or not, but I know she is much loved. I love her, and again, like, I haven't read a book from her, but I'm very, very excited for Venko. It sounds really amazing. So yeah, so those are three books I just kind of wanted to shout out that are coming out pretty soon. All right. Moving on to the second last part of this episode, my reading update. So I am still reading Dandelion which was on the long list of Canada Reads. Unfortunately, it didn't make the short list. In case you missed the short list, Ducks by Kate Beaton, Mexican Gothic by Sylvia Morena Garcia, Hotline by Dimitri Nasrallah made the short list, which I'm very, very excited for. I loved all three of those books over Moon of the Crusted Snow, which a little disappointing, but that's fine. So Station 11 is on the shortlist, as well as Greenwood by Michael Christie, which I haven't read, but I've heard good things. So I think that's the one book that I will definitely read from the shortlist because, of course, the other three I've read already. However, Dandelion did not make it, which makes me very sad. I think I said this in my previous episode that it seems to me to be a very underrated read, and I am backing that statement up if I said it in the previous episode. If not, I am backing it up right now because it is such a beautiful book. Even though the first part takes place from the main character's childhood, it is not written young at all. It's very much written with a mature hand. It's just beautiful writing, and I loved the story. I'm just over halfway through, so I'm very close in being done. So I will definitely have a better update for you for this book next time around. But just know that it's just like you have to read Dandelion by Jamie Chayun Liu. It is just beautiful, and I definitely need to get myself a hard copy because right now I'm borrowing it from the library. I apologize for the people who've been waiting for it through the Toronto Public Library. I'm almost done, I promise. And How to Love Your Neighbor by Sophie Sullivan. That was the book that I picked out of the TBR jar last episode. It was good. It was romance. It was nothing special or nothing exciting. Like, it was just a quick and easy read. So, if you're looking for something short and, something like a closed door romance, definitely pick it up. If home improvement is also your thing, I really loved that angle because, like, I watch all the HGTV shows. So, yeah, I thought that was really fun. Speaking of CanLit, I just want to take this time to discuss what your definition of CanLit is because I made a conscious decision for this podcast to include Canadian authors no matter where the book takes place. So, whether it's like with this book portrays my brother in South Africa, or, How to Love Your Neighbor, this book takes place in California. But to me, CanLit truly means like a Canadian author taking place in a Canadian city. So I'm just curious if like that's also your definition or if like CanLit just means Canadian authors to you. So yeah, I'm very curious. Maybe I'll put up a graphic at some point this week and ask, and maybe you guys can all discuss that in the comments. But anyways, I was just curious. That's why I kind of wanted to circle back a bit to the definition of CanLit. Because if I were reading this, I would say, yes, it's a Canadian author, but I wouldn't hashtag like CanLit in my description or in my caption of my photo or anything. You know what I mean? Like it just doesn't have Canadian content in it. It's just written by a Canadian author. So I just thought that was pretty interesting about the book. But for this podcast, it's to highlight Canadian authors. So that's what I'm going to do, regardless of where the books take place. I'm just curious about what you define CanLit as. All right, and since we're ending that reading update off with our TBR jar pick from last week, How to Love Your Neighbor by Sophie Sullivan, it is now time to pick another one. So let's get right to that. Where do I put this? Oh my god, there's too many things around me. So I feel like this CanLit TBR jar is not getting smaller, it's getting bigger. Um, but whatever. I like to buy books. Buying books makes me happy. So let me choose one. I tried to mix it up earlier, but I feel like I might have failed at that. Let's see what this book is. Johnny Appleseed. So I know that's a very short book. Oh my god, I've been meaning to read this book for the longest time. By Joshua Whitehead. That's who it is. So this is Joshua Whitehead's debut novel about a two-spirit indigiqueer young man and proud Indian glitter princess who must reckon with his past when he returns home to his reserve. So I know I've seen mixed reviews for this, but I'm very excited to see where I land on that. I think this book is pretty short, so if I do find that I finish it fast, then I will try to pick another book from this TBR jar before the next episode, and maybe have more CanLit books to talk to you about. But yeah, I'm very excited to finally get Johnny Appleseed checked off my TBR because it's one of those books that should not have stayed there as long as it has. So I'm glad to say that I won't be embarrassed to say or to pretend that I've read Johnny Appleseed. All right, there we have it. I hope I've convinced you to read a new book by now. I feel like I haven't, but you know what? That's okay. I'm just going to talk about books until you read them. There's many, many more episodes to do that in. Make sure you support your local bookstore when you can. And yeah, just keep supporting Canadian authors because we have a lot of great stories to tell the world. And my next episode will be on Valentine's Day. So I will have a special romancy type focused, mostly focused, book recommendations list for you then. So I'm excited to get that out to you guys on Valentine's Day. But anyways, for now, happy reading. Enjoy some great Canlit and stay warm with this weather because it's going to get cold. Thanks for listening to the Get Canlit podcast, a show that's all about what Canadian authors you need to read next. Don't forget to rate, review, and follow on your favorite platform, and watch out for new episodes every other Tuesday. You can find me on social media at Get Canlit Podcast on Instagram and Facebook, and at Get Canlit Pod on Twitter. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.